I'm gonna share my slides right now. And I would like you to imagine a day after coronavirus, without social distancing, without face masks. Imagine it's a warm summer afternoon. You're just hanging out with friends, enjoying some cold lemonade, and you can hear distant chatter and birds singing. But suddenly, there is a buzzing sound and a fly passes right next to your head. Try to focus on this insect and not to lose sight of it as long as you can. How did it fly? What was its trajectory? Did the fly go from point A to point B in a straight line? Of course not, right? No insect ever does it. Observing it for as little as a couple of seconds was enough to witness it flying all over the place. And why does it do it? Like, is the fly having problems with flying? No, actually, quite the opposite. If you think about it, it's exhibiting extraordinary maneuverability, fighting for its life. How? Well, random changes in direction make the fly a lot harder to catch, actively deceiving predators. But, well, what's a fly's gain is a bird's loss. And coping with unpredictability isn't an issue that only birds face. It also affects us, IT professionals. When you think of it, you can probably recall a moment when your tests failed just to pass correctly after nothing but a restart. And after you found the cause of the issue, it could be a statement like, wait 100 milliseconds. So how do you solve it? How do you make the test pass? Well, I could try to change 100 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds. And it might work. It might temporarily fix the problem. Well, unfortunately, it's not going to guarantee that it won't happen again. And even more importantly, it's not going to silence our inner voice telling us that it might not be the most professional thing to do. Let's assume that we have an app that fetches a list of items. It takes a while to load it over the network, and we would like to test that there is a spinner and that some buttons are disabled while the list is being loaded. And even though it sounds very simple, it turns out to be surprisingly tricky to implement it. And one thing in particular might pose a challenge: timing. How can you make sure that your test has enough time to perform all the necessary assertions before the data arrives over a network and makes the screen transition from a spinner to a list? Well, again, you could add some artificial delay, like 100 milliseconds, to your mocked service. But then you don't really know what should be the number: 100 milliseconds, 84 milliseconds, or maybe 1 second. Well, it depends on plenty of things, like the performance of the machine the tests are running on, and even the current load of this machine, because as little as a little slowdown can make the tests fail, even though the app works properly. And we all know that the tests should be something that tells us when the app is broken. When they fail, our reaction should be like, oh no, the tests, not the test broke, the app broke, and not like, the tests broke. So what could we do? Like, if you just imagine that you could make somehow your tests communicate with your mocks, and then communicate something like, hey, I have finished all the assertions for now, and I'm ready for you to give the app the data it asked for. There would be no race condition whatsoever. And you could see an increase in multiple areas, spanning like from the stability of individual test cases through the performance of the whole build pipeline, all the way to our well-being. And I've got something that might give you relief. In Endpoint Imposter, which is a mocking tool, you can assign what's called a release key to any mocked response. And then the mock is going to return the data to the app only after the test explicitly asks it to do it. So you can have enough time to perform all the necessary assertions, like are the buttons disabled? Is the tab key doing nothing? Is the spinner visible? And then you tell, okay, now performing new assertions about the list. It's that simple. It relies on communication between tests and mocks instead of these things competing with each other. And it makes race conditions a thing of the past. Because to be honest, relying on horse racing to make income is gambling, not a profession. And relying on your tests waiting an arbitrary number of milliseconds is also more like gambling than a profession. So if there is one thing I would like you to take away from this short talk, is to let endpoint imposter make it easy for you to catch bugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Łukasz. Let's open it up for some discussion and questions. You can ask them now or after the second presentation.
Maybe I have, it's not really a question, but if you have like an example of like a real life example where you use the endpoint imposter.
Unfortunately, the biggest real life example is a app I work on at my job, and it's not open source, so I cannot share it.
But
now.
if you could like tell us how you came up with this, like maybe that's what I wanted to ask.
Oh, that is actually a pretty long story because okay. I think I could sum it up as a situation I ran into a couple of years ago when I had something that was working well on staging and on my dev machine, but turned out to be failing in production. And we discovered that there were some crazy race conditions that were happening in the API of a third-party service, which due to like the performance and load of different environments, was just impossible to just recreate on our dev machines or staging environment. And then I needed to prepare a mock that was closely resembling that real environment with all the quirks, with all the different orders of responses to test if my service was actually working. So that was the motivation for like manual releases and state machines under the hood. So I could build something that from the outside looks like the production API of some third-party company, but I have the control, the power to make it behave in plenty of different things, but always in a way that I can reproduce it every single time.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any? Go ahead.
Yeah. I think if you have any more questions or you want to reach out to Łukasz, we can all continue the discussion in the CTM Slack channel, and let's move forward with the second presentation.
Okay, hi everyone. I think everybody can hear me.
Yep.
Cool. Right, so I will try to share my experience with creating the npm-wrapper for the new driver, and yeah, it's mostly will be about the approach and the concept. So it's not only for the Node.js, I assume it can be used for any other languages. So let's just start. Browser, driver, wrapper. So I think most of you heard about it, and I don't want to tell the story like what's the WebDriver, how it works, like that WebDriver requires driver and like Puppeteer does not. So let's just go straight to this announcement, right? So I think in the early this year, Microsoft released the first stable version of the Microsoft Edge. And yeah, it's Chromium based, so it's a separate discussion, like whether you need to test both Chrome and the new Edge. I think in most cases you don't. But like currently it's automatic update for the Windows machines. So if your users are on Windows, then most likely they will use the new Edge because it's have pretty the same experience as the Chrome. And so we decided to give a shot with the new Edge. And the good thing that Microsoft team, like the Edge team, they also were working on the related driver to manage the new browser. So you can get the driver, but like we don't want to do it manually, right? To download the driver and to do it every time, do it locally, do it on CI. And so that's where we use the wrappers, right? So so the first thing that you probably do if you write in Node.js is that you will come to the npm and search for the wrapper for the driver. So you do have the Chrome driver, Gecko driver, and you do have Edge driver, but there is one problem. It was published a year ago and the version looks very suspicious. So it reminds you the legacy version. And right, you can see this message. I haven't personally tested this WebDriver at all. It's so nice that you can give a shot and test it. And yes, it's not working. It's not working with the new driver. So I think this answers why you may want to write your own wrapper. Basically, if there is not available anyone, then you have to design your own. And well, let's try to do it. So basically, I suggest just try to look at like what specifically you need to start the session with the WebDriver. And if you start looking at the line 3 of the code, you will see that we set the binary path. This is the path of the actual browser binary, not the driver itself. So it means that we should know the path to the browser installation, like where's that binary. And like we don't want to take it every time manually, right? Because I do have my own and you will have your own, and there is difference between different operation systems. And then you can see where that set Edge service in the builder. There is new Edge.service builder, and we also provide the driver path. So this is our like expected output from the wrapper, right? So we like wrapper should automate something. This is some like helper tool library that solves some problem for us. So specifically for the new Edge, we expect to have 2 paths. One of them is the browser binary and the other one is the driver. Cool, so we know like the requirements. And about the wrapper functionality, right? So yeah, it depends on the language bindings, but usually they just provide the same functionality. So they may detect the browser path. It's optional. Like for the Edge, I think it makes sense. They're supposed to download and extract the driver. And they're supposed to export the path to the binary. So you can just use the path to create a new WebDriver session. And most of the wrappers, they usually allow you to start the binary as the process with specific port that you can just later on listen to. Yeah, and like when we create the wrapper, right? So as we discussed, we need to check the browser, and like we trying to detect the browser version, and I'll explain later why we're supposed to know the browser version. So first of all, we need to detect OS because like if it's Mac OS, then yeah, then see I can share my switch, right? You can see my Visual Code Studio. So yeah, you can just run this command and you will get the version of locally installed Microsoft Edge. But this is the theme for the Mac, and it's working okay. But if we will be doing it on the Windows machine, then it's going to be different. We can like there are different approaches, but I like to follow like the registry. So like all the applications that I installed, they've been registered on the Windows machine. So this particular registry registry is working on the most of the machine that I tried to, that my colleagues tried to. And so like you need to connect to the registry. So you're supposed to use some library, and like then you use, like I just wrote my function get registry key to find the key, and then on that key you can find location and the version and return it. So like, okay, we know the browser version. What we can do next? Getting the correct driver. Why it's important? I'm pretty sure that any of you were facing at least once this browser driver compatibility issue. Like session can be created because this version of Chrome driver only supports Chrome version like X, and this is happening because you cannot use, for example, the very old version of the driver against the latest browser, mostly because some APIs been changing, and like it's fine, right? It's like the major version updates in real world means that like can be some compatibility issue. It's not a patch; it's a major update. So it's really important to get the driver based on what browser you have. And specifically for the new Edge, also I was doing some testing, and I realized that like it makes sense to download the latest stable mesh. So for example, there is browser version 83, but there are two drivers, 83.1 and 83.2. And it makes sense to just get the 83.2 because it probably contains some patches and fixes for the driver, because the driver also has some bugs, and it still be working. But it's really important. So like if somehow my browser was not updated and I'm 83, I'm not supposed to try downloading driver 84 because it wouldn't work most likely. Yeah, so like, and when we get the driver locally, then we just extract the binary. And yeah, I have, I think, also link here, just quickly to show. Yeah, so basically downloading the driver, version matcher. So like if the version is the latest, like then we check, just use prefix latest stable. Otherwise we get the latest release and we pass the version. So it means that like we will search for the latest available version in the in some Microsoft Artifactory. Yeah, and basically this is it. We just like we build download URL, we like get the file, and yeah, we just then continue. Cool. So handle edge cases. So far it may look very straightforward, right? So like we detected that the browser is installed, like we check its version, we get the same version of the driver, we extract it, and it feels like it's fine. But does it really works that straightforward every time? Not really. So like, for example, currently Microsoft Edge, the new Edge, is not available on the Linux machines. So like, what if we have the worker, like a Linux worker, and for whatever reason we try to spin up the session of the new Edge? So from my perspective, the wrapper can handle it, right? It can just throw an error saying like it's not supported. What if for some reason you install your browser manually locally with the custom path? Like you just selected not to go with the default applications or with the custom path on Windows. In this case, the wrapper should have possibility to override the default path and H key. Forcing driver version path. Maybe you know, like maybe you're trying to understand whether it's a bug of the application or it's a bug of the driver, and you would like to give it a try with different driver versions. In this case, you would like to break the default logic, like the matching rule of the compatibility, and you, for example, you would like to try the older version of the driver. So like try to run, so you have 83.1 and 83.2, and you specifically would like to give a run with 83.1. and like the wrapper should also support it. What happens if the browser version is not detected? So in my case, I decided just to go with the latest one because, okay, the browser was defined, but the version cannot be detected. So I assume that auto update is working perfectly, and the driver latest version will suit. At least let's give it a run. Custom binaries URL. So for example, if you some users some companies might have specifically disable access to the internet, and like you cannot download resources like driver from the public resource online. But at the same time, you have your own like Artifactory that manage resources. And in this case, you can just override the URL where you store this driver. So instead of downloading from the Microsoft site, like the wrapper will go to some Artifactory of your own. Get driver on package installation. So from my experience, most of the wrappers install driver straight during the package installation. And I find it a bit frustrating because you may not use this driver at all. And the size of the driver may surprise you. Like for the new Edge driver, I think the driver itself may be like 50 to 70 megabytes, and it's time, right? It really depends on the latency of the system. In this specific wrapper, I decided just to have a flag. So by default, driver is not downloaded on the package installation, but you can override it and get it as the usual way. And in the end, there are like links to the tests. So initially, I wrote the wrapper without the tests, right? Why I'm supposed to write the test is just like straightforward logic, but I realized very quickly that it's really hard to follow all the edge cases, and you just have to have proper tests with the mocks, and it like what's happening when I run on the non-supported platform. Like what happens if the browser and driver path is set up explicitly, right? So if you already provided the browser and driver path, the wrapper is supposed to do nothing because you decided on your own that you know better, and the wrapper should just return the same values. Yep. And this is how it looks in my case. So just 5 dependencies. So just general suggestion, if you're working on something that you will open source, just make sure that you don't bring any vulnerabilities, like the license. Just check that it's not your company license. Check with your company if it's fine, and of course check the size. Make sure you don't publish the driver itself, right? So like it shouldn't be like 20 megabytes module on npm. And it's very easy to publish something on npm. It's like you have to register, and like it's a clear like npm publish, and very simple. One general suggestion: if you write something that like not only for you, even if it's only for you and your company, just make sure to have a good example. So just how to use it, right? So, and it's better just to map it with some like library that it's supposed to be used with. So like, I don't think it's supposed to be used with the WebDriver IO, because WebDriver IO by itself downloads the drivers. It handles everything on its own, but Selenium WebDriver library does not. So, right, if you're using this library, then you just have it as example. Cool. So yeah, you can see here how it works. So like we have const edge path equals await install driver. So here we just get the path of the browser path and driver path, and we just create a new session of the new edge. And as I said, specifically how we use it in the Kibana is that we just check. So if the browser type is Chromium Edge, only in this case we download the driver, because otherwise I don't want to spend time on getting 50 megabytes of something that won't be used during worker execution. yeah, like this is the real code. So you can see that like the code in the actual use case is pretty similar to the code I was showing in an example. So like case ms edge, we just check if edge path is not undefined, and like if, since we know that the session can be created only if both browser path and driver paths are defined, we must check it, because like if we don't know one of them, like if we don't know the browser path but we do know the driver, we still won't be able to create a session. So like this is the rule. Yeah, and yes, thank you. Any questions? And like, yeah, I just switch for now to the Visual Code Studio, just open the project. So like if you have any questions, I can just go through it. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, Dmitry. Does anyone have any questions? Well, while someone thinks of a question, no, first of all, I just wanted to thank you both, because sometimes I, at least personally, tend to forget how hard it is to build a presentation, since I had to do a couple of presentations a couple of weeks ago. I remembered all the time you need. So I just want to thank you. We both want to thank you about doing this presentation and taking the time to prepare it. So yeah, thanks for that. But I had one question, if you related to the building of the browser driver. So in theory, when you use it, are you using it in your CI tests, and then so I cannot formulate the question properly. I have it in my head, but I cannot say it properly. So what I'm trying to say is that when you use it, like, is there a way that you can cache the download for future builds? Because I mean, if you're going to run a build and the driver is not changing often, so that was kind of the question.
Yeah, we do it like for the Chrome driver and Gecko driver. So we like, since I think we run like 22 threads on the Linux machine for the Gecko driver and Chrome driver. So like for them specifically, we do cache the driver once, right? So we download it and we just like, we don't re-download it for each thread. But for the Edge, for now, like we just use like one worker on Windows, basically, just because, as I say, if you do testing on the Chrome driver, there is not much need to do retesting on the Edge, because it's still Chromium, and you can hardly see any difference in terms of how your application, at least for the React and Angular applications, you can hardly notice any difference. But at the same time, just like to say that like we do test on the Windows machine and we do test the new Edge, we have like small set of like tests that we run on Windows Worker, but we don't cache in this case. Like.
Then I have a follow-up question. Are there any specific areas where Internet Explorer diverges from Chromium? So somewhere where I should basically decide those tests are more relevant to be retested?
Well, to be honest, like from my experience, so like, okay, let's just take like Chrome and Firefox. For example, from my experience, Firefox handles promises differently. So like if you know a bit about the development of the web applications, promises is like really crucial thing. And you may notice that the things that work in Chrome may not work on Firefox, and vice versa. But here it's like you have the same engine. So mostly, like from my experience, I ran like, I think all of the like 1.5K of our functional tests because you know Kibana is a huge product, so like we have a bunch of tests, but there was like no any test failed. So all of them that are passing on Chrome, they passed on the Edge. But I say like there are some things like saving files right locally, and like trying to open PDFs reports on Windows. So there may be some kind of things, but so far I didn't notice anything. It's more like you never know, right? There will be a new release, and maybe Microsoft team is smart enough to extend the Chromium with their own APIs on top of it. who knows? Probably they wouldn't do it because they just take the new version of Chromium and put some kind of fancy UI, but we never know, right? So I'm not tracking the Microsoft changes for the browser, so I cannot say what test you're supposed to try.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, first, before I forget, so we had the idea of doing this morning meetup thanks to Severin. He actually gave us the idea to do that, so thank you for that. But we cannot see your breakfast, Severin.
Where is it? Where's your breakfast?
Cool.
I finished mine. I have only wine and water.
Wine. That's good for breakfast.
That's a good start. Yeah.
Yeah, when I posted a note at the Slack channel of our company, like some people reacted with beer. I don't know what's the logic, but someone is drinking beer in the morning, I guess.
It's Germany.
Yeah, Germany.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, something I wanted to ask you, Dzmitry, if you want, is if the wrapper is getting usage, maybe you should send us a pull request to the Selenium project. We have a page where we mention projects in the ecosystem that are helpful. So I can send you the link and we can merge that quickly, so it gets more usage. And does anyone have questions for Łukasz, maybe? Or any of the questions that we can, any of the presentations we can discuss questions about them. I think people are not having their warm drink in the morning. So quiet today.
Looking right now.
All right. Something I wanted to also ask was if you were using about the drivers, the wrappers, are you using other projects to download the other browser drivers, or?
You mean like, do we use Chrome driver? Yes, we use Chrome driver, npm package, and Gecko driver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we use, but as I say, like we do cache both. As I say, this is the difference, right? So one thing that I don't like about the Chrome driver and Gecko driver implementation is that like they download driver like on installation, and you basically you can override behavior by updating like npm settings, but like if you use yarn, for example, it's a different story. So like, yeah, we're using them, but we're a bit hacking them, just as you say, not to download it multiple times. If already the same binary exists, then we just cache it once and that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I'm just asking because in the Selenium project, some of us were thinking like this would be a nice functionality to offer to end users, but then we had a look on the complexity of implementing a wrapper for the driver. It's a lot, so that's why we have thought like maybe this would be a nice feature for the long future. But yeah, like dealing with the registry and dealing with the path and so on, it's a lot. And then yeah, so that's I wanted also to highlight the complexity of doing something like that. But yeah, I think if we don't have any more questions, we can wrap it up early. Before doing that, we have our next meetup. So next Thursday, Sarah, who is also in the call, I think, in the Zoom. Yeah, I think she's there. Sarah is going to do a presentation called Hunting Bugs with Puppeteer and AWS Lambda. I think it will be quite interesting. Many people have asked things about that in previous meetups when we were doing them in person. So during lunchtime next Thursday, we're going to have that meetup. And it would be cool if you can join the event as well. I think that's pretty much it. Do you have anything else to add? Like maybe Łukasz, Dzmitry, or Paulina, do you want to add something?
I think it was great. Thank you both. And thank you everyone who joined us today. We're looking forward to see you next time and join our Slack channel.
Cool. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.